All right, today we're going to be working on a grid expansion drawing that we have already started. And so we have, this is my sample drawing. It's going to be our cat that had kittens. And so I have my sketch done and I'm ready to start working on it. And you can see I have a lot of the details ready to go and they're drawn in. Now, before I do anything else, the first thing I'm going to do to make sure that my drawing doesn't look very boxy is I'm going to take my eraser and I'm going to erase all of the grid lines. Okay, once we have everything drawn, we get rid of the grid lines. If you leave them on there, it's really easy to go and do your shading square by square on your grid. And then what happens is you end up with this weird kind of gritty looking element to your shading, and it makes your drawing not look as realistic. And the whole point of doing a grid expansion is to have a beautiful, nice, realistic drawing of your subject without the grid on it. And so we can't achieve that if we're shading with the grid lines on. So I'm going around, I'm getting rid of all of my grid lines so that I can start shading realistically and having this whole thing look like the photo that I am working from. Okay, so I'm getting rid of my drawing. And anytime I work on a drawing, one of the things that I do first is I wash my hands with soap and water. I want to make sure my hands are totally clean, that I'm not transferring any oils from lotion, from like some chips that I ate or whatever, you know, pizza that I had at lunch or any of that junk. So I'm getting rid of all of my grid lines. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pick a spot to start on. And it can be anywhere in your drawing. It doesn't really matter what you start with first, but you always want to be careful that you're not smudging your drawing. Okay, so I'm getting everything nice and erased. Okay, so here's my kitty, and we're ready to start shading. Okay, so here's some of my favorite tools that I have. One of them is this value checker that I'm going to use to check between my drawing and my photo. Okay, so I think that I'm going to start with the mama cat's face because that's the part that I'm most interested in doing. And so I'm going to have a piece of scratch paper handy. I like to keep my scratch paper, and I'm starting out my shading with a HB pencil. Okay, so this is an HB, and so real quick, there's all different shades of pencils, and let me show you how they look. Okay, so I'm gonna set Mama Kitty aside for a minute because I never want to write on top of a drawing that I have going. Okay, so the pencils that we use for shading are HBs, 2B, 4B, 6B, and an 8B, which is also an ebony pencil. Okay, so here's how they look. Okay, so an HB is a normal number 2, right? So we know this one. This is our like generic Ticonderoga. So here's how dark an HB writes. Okay, and so as you get higher up in the number, the pencil leads get softer, which means that the lines that they make are thicker and easier to blend. So you can see HB, a number 2, 2B, and 4B. And I like to think of the B as bold and the H as hard. So here's a 6B, and you can see dramatically darker as you go across. And then here is a Design Ebony pencil, and it is the thickest and the darkest, right? Okay, so big dramatic jumps. And you can see HB for smearing, smears a little. 2B smears more. 4B smears even more. 6B even more than that. And at 8 and at Ebony and 8B smears a ton. Okay, so I don't want to use these ones too early in my drawing because they smudge a lot. So for the beginning part of my drawing, everything I'm going to do is going to be in the HB and 2B because you can get carried away really quickly and end up with things that are like smearing everywhere. So it's really tempting to be like, oh, okay, when I look at my drawing, I have a really dark part right here. I'm just going to grab the 8B Ebony, the Design Ebony, and just go for it. But what that does is it ends up smudging into other areas. Okay, so everything that we're going to do initially with a drawing is going to be with an HB or a 2B. Okay, so that's what we're going to start with. So I'm going to look at Mama Kitty's face, and the first thing that I'm going to do is start in with a light touch with nice shading. So I have my scratch paper, and one of the reasons I have my scratch paper is so that I can scribble on it and give myself kind of a softer edge, and then I'm going to practice my light values. And I'm not even going to get into texture for a while. What I'm going to do is just get into shading, okay? So you can see, here's my light value that I'm using, and I've made that angled pencil tip, and once I get a good feel for it, I'm going to come over here and do that. And it takes a lot of practice to learn what's the right pressure for the values that you're going to make, okay? And so this value that I just made is about a 2, and so I'm looking over here, and that's a good place to start with some of the lighter areas of Mama Kitty's face, okay? So I'm going to come over here, and I'm going to start just lightly starting to develop my shading. And one of the things I want to do with my shading is establish the three-dimensional form of the cat. Okay, now another thing I like to do is I like to turn it so that the mark making I'm making is going to line up with the fur that's in that area. Okay, and this is something I do with animals that I'm drawing, but if you're drawing a person or whatever, you can do the same thing with your shading, and it doesn't matter like the direction of it. Like you can think about it in terms of contouring and stuff like that, but it's not totally necessary. So I always keep my reference photo handy and close by. Now, one of the things that you want to do as you are shading is work on getting rid of or absorbing the lines that you drew to outline everything. Okay, and I'm keeping my picture close to because I want to be looking at all the shapes, all the shading that I want to establish. And you can see I'm not going in here like I'm coloring in my thing and having liney pencil marks show. That doesn't make what we're doing look realistic. So I'm going to get my light touch back here. I'm going to come over here and I'm going to keep shading. Now, if you want your shading to look good, it is a slow and careful process, okay? The difference between really good, really realistic drawings and ones that are kind of scribbly is just the amount of time that you're putting in there. Okay. So I'm going to get those three-dimensional forms established first. And this is a slow and steady process. So you don't get a beautiful drawing by rushing through it with the goal of being finished. You get a beautiful drawing by going slow and making sure it looks as close to your picture as you can. Okay, so I have some mark making in here that I'm going to want to show some of the kitty fur stripes. Okay, so I'm going to come in here. So I have this and I have this little shape. So all I'm doing is looking for shapes in my picture and then I'm making them in my drawing. Whether or not I think that those shapes are weird or whatever, it doesn't matter. I'm just going to make them because that's what makes my drawing accurate. So this darker area is going to come and it's going to climb around the cat's eye. And this is the same approach no matter what your subject is. And so you just go from one area to the next, building up your values. Now, potentially I could do my entire drawing with this pencil and that would be totally fine and work. And there is definitely a lot to be said for being patient here. Okay, so I have some details around the nose here that I'm going to go in and start to develop with the tip of the pencil. And anytime I'm working with the very tip of the pencil, I'm going to be quite a bit more cautious because it makes darker lines and harder shapes. Okay, so this dark area is going to come up this way and over here. Sometimes I use little round motions Sometimes I use straight lines. It just depends on what the value is that I need in that area. So all I'm doing is looking for shapes and values that I see in my drawing. So if I'm looking at this area right here next to Mama's nose, the nose is about a 4 down the midline, and then not quite a 5 for those dark areas. And so I can come over here to what I drew and say, I'm gonna need to go a lot darker, okay? And so initially the whole thing that you're doing is getting the values correct. After you have all your values really carefully developed, then you'll go back and start working on your textures. And that takes a little while. I'm building up my values. Now, one of the things you definitely don't want to do is go in and draw a bunch of dark lines. Dark lines make grooves in your paper that are hard to get rid of. And so you always want to be cautious about avoiding any really dark lines or any areas that you get dark too quick, too soon in your drawing, because it's really easy to take a light area and shade it in. It's really easy to take a dark, or it's really hard to take a dark area and fix it and make it lighter. And so you want to avoid excessive darkness too early in the game. Now, right here, it's really tempting to draw a straight line for that area, but that's not how that actually looks. So I'm looking for what the shape of that is. So there's kind of a curve that hooks up, and it dips a little, and then it comes across to a wider area. And then there's some hairs that go across there. So I have a cool tool to show you how to make light areas that are thin and skinny. Okay, so one of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to use my finger to blend stuff. Okay, the other thing that I can do is I can go over here and I can get this tool, which is a tortillon or a blending stump. This is just rolled paper. So if you have any of this paper that's coming loose, the thing you want to do is immediately get some school glue and glue it down so it stays in place. And this is a brand new one. These work the best when they've been used for a while and they're dirty and old. You never want to try and clean them off because it's the dirtiness that works great. Now, it is really tempting once you start using some of these tools to go in and start smearing everything around. Okay, and you can see this can be a drawing tool or a blending tool depending on how you use it. So what I like to do is I like to come in and gently blend stuff. And one of the things that happens when I blend is it makes the values darker. Okay, another thing it does is it makes everything soft and blurry. And so if I want to show texture, this tool gets rid of texture. So this is nice for like, oh, I'm working on a drawing of a person. I want to smooth out their skin tones, you know, and make the skin texture really even and nice. This is a great tool for that. Okay, and you can see how quickly everything gets soft and really blurry and creamy. So what you don't want to do with this tool is do your whole drawing with it, because what will happen is everything will be smeary. Okay, and that's the same thing with tissue. I use just regular tissue. It has to be the kind that doesn't have lotion in it. And what I do is I take that tissue and I wrap it around my finger. Okay, and just kind of fold it so I can hold it with the other finger. It doesn't matter how you do this, but it does matter that the part you're blending with is smooth and flat. So I can get over here and I can pick up graphite to shade things with, you know, so I can come over here on Mama Cat and blend stuff over this direction. But you can see this has the same thing going on that this has going on, which is that it makes everything really soft and blurry. Okay, and so that's fine for some areas, but you only want soft and blurry if you have sharp and defined a contrast with it. But this is a great thing to use for shading skin tone, for anything you want to have a nice smooth finish. What you definitely don't want to do is have it in a wad like this. This is a really common mistake and it doesn't work the way you think it's going to work. So let's say I have some graphite over here and I want to go and get my stuff in here and smooth it around, look at the marks that come from having it in a wad. So you don't ever want unintentional marks transferring around, which is why anytime you're using tissue, you take it and you carefully wrap it around your finger, okay? So that the end is smooth, okay? Look at the difference in the mark making when it's wrapped, okay? This one has crinkle marks in it, crinkle marks from being wadded up. This one is smooth and creamy, great skin tones, great texture, stuff like that, okay? Here's another tool that I like. This is a great tool for getting light areas. And this is an eraser shield. So eraser shields bend and get tweaked and messed up really easily, but what they do is they cover an area so that you can erase out light stuff, right? So with my cat right here, you can see there's a bunch of light shading around here that has been kind of blended in as we use some of our blending tools, right? And so I've lost some of my defined areas. So once I have that shading established, I can come in with my eraser shield and erase back some really clean, sharp marks. So here's the type of thing that it does. So let's say I just want a little sharp edge. I can erase out perfectly straight lines in shading that I have made with this, okay? I can also erase out little dots, little edges, little reflected highlights in someone's eye if I'm doing a portrait of a person, little interior bits of an eyelid, all those things, okay? So you can see little dots and little like lines and straight edges if I want really linear components. An eraser shield does a great job with that. And it's called an eraser shield because it shields the rest of your drawing from it. So I could come over here with this if I wanted to and erase out a little bit of texture, okay? And it's gonna give it a nice defined edge, but protect the rest of my shaded area, okay? And so I can come around with Mama Kitty, lighten up some of my areas that got a little too dark, and it's gonna protect the rest of my drawing, okay? So that's how that works. Now, let's zoom in a little bit and let's look at some shading techniques that we're gonna do with developing light and dark areas and fur. So we're gonna zoom in a little bit here and we're gonna get a little texture. Now, the texture we do for fur is the same texture that we're gonna use for grass, for, you know, short fur, for long fur, for anything that's got sharp, pointy components, okay? Now, what I do for fur is I come in and I shade the stuff around it, okay? So let's say I'm gonna develop some of this fur right here. Actually, I probably want spikier fur than that. Let's go do this fur right here, okay? So here's her tummy, right? And we can see this fur where there's dark areas behind it and then this light fur over the top. So I've kind of marked out where I want to put that in here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to first shade into it, okay? So I'm going to get, I think I'm going to get a 2B for this, for the sake of being a little more efficient for this demonstration. Make sure none of my little lines are showing, okay? So I'm going to shade into that. So I'm gonna always get my paper ready, or my tip of my pencil ready to make those shapes. Now I can see this is all going in this direction. And what I'm gonna do first is I'm going to establish the background tone in that area. Then I'm gonna blend it, and then I'm gonna erase back into it to create those light shapes. The biggest goal that we have for any drawing that we're doing that we want to be realistic is for there to be no outlines around things and for there to be nice, consistent shading that's accurate to the photo. Okay, so I'm gonna get this going and try and establish my tone for that area. I'm gonna blend it with my finger first to smooth it all together. I'm gonna check my gradients with my value scale. Ooh, that's pretty dark. It's like a 5. Okay, so I'm gonna get that nice and dark. Okay, so anytime I pick up my pencil, I always bevel it on my scratch paper that's right next to it. So I have my little puddle of dark and I have my flattened edge. And I'm gonna get this pretty well developed. I'm gonna try and get it to a 4 because I'm gonna come back and darken it more after I've established my dark area in there. And there's hair going in a lot of different directions here, so I wanna kind of keep that in mind. Keep an eye on it. Get it as dark as I want it to be. Okay, I'm gonna take my tissue, wrap it smoothly around my finger. I'm gonna transfer some of this dark over here so that I have it. And you can see when we rub or blend the graphite together, it gets dramatically darker, okay? So I have blended away all of my pencil lines in there, which is exactly what I want. Okay, now I'm gonna get in here with my eraser and I'm gonna look at the direction that those hairs go. And I'm going to start making those marks with an eraser. Okay, going this way, a little bit over here. Now, you can see I have a little distance happening. Okay, so I'm gonna erase back into it. Now, this is the coolest skill for shading that I really like to use a lot. Okay, so I have all of these fine pointy shapes in here, but I have a blurry dark area and a kind of blurry light area. So I'm gonna get back in here with my HB and I'm going to draw marks that go this way into that shaded fur. So I'm gonna come over here and look at those shapes and I'm just gonna start actually letting some mark making show so that my kitty's gonna look like it has long fur that's gonna be evident. Okay, and I'm gonna look at the angle and the chunking of the dark areas and get something going that has those same gaps. Okay, so I have this skinny one here, I have a bigger one there, and then it kind of fades into kind of looser lines that come up this way. Okay, so you have to keep track of your areas. So I'm gonna get these going like this. Now, once I've established some points, see how Kitty's starting to look furry? Now I'm gonna switch into a darker pencil. I'm gonna do the same thing again, because what I'm looking for now is getting the right amount of contrast. And look how quick that starts looking like fur. This is such a cool thing that turns out really nice every time. And I have to be careful to save this area because we can see that should be right here. So I'm gonna kind of leave that area alone because I'm just working on getting this fur right here to feel like a longer texture. And it's darker behind it. And this dark area is fairly undefined and blurry. So I'm gonna do some of that and have it blend in. Okay. So all of this is fairly gradual. And if I got too much in one area, I'm gonna go back and erase it out and fix it. Like, whoops, that area got too dark and this one got too much stuff right there. So I'm gonna come back and erase back into it again. Okay, and then I'm gonna draw back into it with my 2B. And like we said, we don't want to jump in and go super, super dark too fast because we don't want our pencil lines to show and we want everything to look nice. And friends are home. So we're gonna stop right there. Hope you enjoyed that drawing demo and that gives you a lot of good ideas. I'm gonna get back in here real quick and just darken that edge before we finish. Okay, so that's how you want to start your shading and how we can get some simple textures and good value. Do you guys want to meet the cat?
Meet what cat?
This one. Everyone say hi. She doesn't want to look. Okay, enjoy that video. Get to work on your assignments, everyone.